Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Strap yourselves in, guys, it's going to be a white knuckle ride. I've got an awful lot to talk to you about again, and this seems to be happening every single day. Hopefully I am digesting enough of the news for you that I make A, cogent sense, and B, it's useful for you, and C, you don't have to trawl through everything. But it does mean that some of these videos are quite long because there's, my goodness, so much going on at the moment. A couple of safety messages to put out, sort of doing a bit of housekeeping. A few people have said to me, look, I've just been banned from the live chat from you, and a couple of like strong supporters of the channel have been, and partly it could be because people might be pushing back, because when I am quite frankly very critical of Donald Trump, it might appear I'm being critical of the United States, and they then get defensive about that. Please, for those of you who are American, I have very many American viewers, and there are many who understand that when I criticize Trump, or I use the term the US does this or US does that, I am invariably meaning the Trump administration, and I am not throwing the entire American population in with that. Let me make that really, really clear. So my criticisms are not against the US as a body of people, but it is against the US as a government that is presently in place under Donald Trump. And I was not nearly as critical of, say, previous governments like the Biden administration. I was critical when needed to be about, say, Ukraine. But in terms of governance at the moment, of foreign policy, I'm super critical of the US at the moment because of Donald Trump. So, but be careful, those mods who do such an amazing job to make the live chats really friendly and good place to hang out. Please also allow for dissenting opinions, unless it's definitely like a troll. Clearly someone who's, we know, I think we've got a pretty good view on trolls, and obviously, you know, outright, you know, rudeness and whatnot, but generally speaking, dissenting opinions should be welcomed, and we should be able to have those kind of discussions either live. I can pick out certain comments that I disagree with vehemently, or similarly in the live chat, but you guys do an amazing job anyway, so thank you for that. Okay, I am going to now start with just a little bit of a synopsis, because basically Donald Trump has just had yet another long rambling speech. He had one yesterday, he's had one today in Davos, where honestly the levels of insanity are off the charts. I'm not going to go there yet. There's quite a long intro to get to there, but I'm going to start with a couple of really important, I think, synopses of what has taken place. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you haven't already done so. It really helps out the channel, so please do that, and it keeps you in the loop as to the latest content and what's going on in the world. Okay, I have my cup of tea. I have a bit of a synopsis of the from yes, it's from the Guardian. Yep, left leading. Okay, that all aside, Trump, I won't use force to take Greenland. So one of the big things that we learned today is we give so much, we get so little in return. Trump says the US only gets death, disruption, and massive amounts of cash to people who don't appreciate what we do. And he's talking about both NATO and Europe generally. He then points out that NATO chief Rutte in the audience, who this morning was complimentary about Trump's pressure to raise military spending among NATO members. Trump appears to state that he won't use force to obtain Greenland. Quote, "We won't get anything unless I use excessive strength and force when we would be unstoppable. I won't use force." He then claims that the US has got nothing out of NATO, and we'll return to that because actually, as this person says, this is quite frankly offensive. NATO's collective defense pledge, Article 5, has been activated only once after 9/11. He says that US has got nothing out of NATO apart from protecting Europe and Russia from Russia. But anyway, so we'll come to that. It's interesting that Denmark's foreign minister says the problem hasn't gone away, so none of this has solved anything. Markets are tracking back up because of the idea that no force is going to be given. So people are believing Donald Trump there, and the markets are reacting more favorably. Nigel Farage has come out and said the world would be safer if the US owned Greenland. So he's now changed his tune back to being supportive of Trump, which is completely unsurprising. Now, this is what I wanted to get to. So this really gave me the shivers, and not good shivers. Okay, so this is from Adam Twos here. Okay, Adam Twos. Trump supporters here at Davos in Switzerland have attitude of serial abuser. My colleague Heather Stewart has just been chatting to the economic historian Adam Tooze, who's been watching the Trump speech here in Davos. He compared the attitude of US Trump supporters he's met here, so Americans who are at Davos that are supportive of Trump, to that of serial abuser, saying one top executive had told him, quote, "This is how it's going to be. We're going to beat up on you, Europe. It's going to hurt. Then we're going to beat up on you some more. You're going to squeal. And then we're going to do some kind of a deal on our terms." He added, "They're just simply saying, you have to accept this is how we are now. This is what it's like." Asked about how other governments should respond, Tooze said, "I think we ought to be thinking quite hard about whatever the international equivalent of getting up and leaving is. We need to strengthen ourselves and have coalitions of friendly people." Okay. I thought that was a scary excerpt from the proceedings. Right. We're going to start. Effective, that's just the preamble. This is a proper start now. This is where I plan to start, which is something that Trump tweeted last night or Truth Socialed last night. And it is so freaking revealing. And if you understand this, then we can look at everything else I'm going to talk about in this video through this lens. Donald J. Trump supposedly reposted this comment from someone, from Bobby D. So at what point are we going to realize the enemy is within? China and Russia are the boogeymen when the real threat is the UN, NATO, and this scare quotes religion. I put religion in quotes because it's not a religion. It's a cult. Yeah, I went there. In other words, Trump appears to have advocated for, and I hope that this isn't someone that's put these two things together and shown Trump to have done that. So if anyone wants to fact check this, that would be great. But if Trump genuinely reposted the idea that the enemy is now the United Nations, the enemy is now NATO, and that China and Russia really aren't the enemies, they're the boogeymen, and the enemy is from within, i.e. maybe Democrats and whatever, if that's genuinely what he said, that is absolutely shocking. Right, to which you can say, and this appears to be actually what's happened because people are hereby repeating this. Trump shared a post on Truth Social claiming that Russia and China are not the enemy, but NATO is. To which Stelos Panaglotou says, so Greenland has to be acquired in order to protect the US from Russia and China, but also Russia and China are not the enemies. Right. So this is a really important point, that you can't on the one hand say you need Greenland for national security against Russia and China, and on the other hand say Russia and China are not the enemies are the UN, NATO, and the enemy from within. This is incredibly, incredibly problematic. And I'm not going to go to Trump's speech too much other than, other than just that kind of NATO framing. This is what he said.
For so many years, we've never gotten anything, except we pay for NATO. And we paid for many years until I came along. We paid for, in my opinion, 100% of NATO because
you don't pay for NATO. You do not pay 100% of NATO for NATO. You pay 100% of your own defense expenditure as a percentage of GDP, and everyone else pays their percentage. NATO isn't a thing. It's not a piece. I've told you this. How many times have I discussed this? And he's still saying this. Like, he's so wrong. But if people don't, like, if his base doesn't understand what NATO is really, and that this is wrong, then they just get swept along by this. And I think he's got his own people who are far more intelligent, or should be, and should be far more knowledgeable going along with this. You know, whether they are lawmakers or part of his diplomatic team. You cannot allow him to say this. This is utterly wrong. You do not pay 100% of NATO. It's just demonstrably false.
Years until I came along, we paid for, in my opinion, 100% of NATO because they weren't paying their bills. And all we're asking for is to get Greenland, including right title and ownership, because you need the ownership to defend it. You can't defend it on a lease. Number one.
You can. I can go and defend Doris's house next door from a fire, from looters, from whatever, if I want to. Well, I can defend that. I could defend it as if it was my own if I wanted. I could defend it as if it was my own, because if I don't defend that house, they're going to take my house next. He's just wrong.
Legally, it's not defensible that way, totally. And number two, psychologically, who the hell wants to defend a license agreement or a lease? Them for so many years. We've never gotten.
So that's where we're at. So it looks like he's regurgitating falsities about NATO and just outright lying and talking nonsense. Now, we also hear that the Pentagon will scale back the US role in NATO Europe, cutting about 200 personnel, mainly from NATO advisory bodies, according to the Washington Post. The move follows troop withdrawals from Romania and aid cuts to the Baltics. So it looks like that is happening. Right, I just want to rewind a little bit to yesterday. So yesterday he gave a big speech that was a long rambling. I mean, it was long. It started, I was watching, then I started watching a program with my missus, I think it was about an hour episode or something. And we came back to it and he was still going. He spoke for 104 minutes in a long, rambling, slurring mess of a speech that primarily seemed to be a domestic speech. Like, he knows, I think, that the polling is terrible at the moment, right across the board for everything. So he, and particularly about what ICE is doing. So he explicitly in the speech said, maybe I've got bad PR on this. He literally said that. And he talked about, he showed all these pictures of people and it was repeating itself. He sounded very demented. He literally, I was speaking to Rob on the back channels, who was saying, God, it keeps repeating itself. And I was like, what, in a dementia style? And he's like 100%. Like, he is, and honestly, it was poor. But I think it was a lot to do with domestic issues. So he didn't really talk about Greenland. I think he came up in the question and answers, but he wasn't leading with that. It was about trying to deal with his own poor polling, which I think is hurting him, obviously, but I think he's also very cognizant of that, and certainly his strategy, the team around him are going to be strategizing on how to deal with that. So he came out and did the job of Kristi Noem, the Secretary for Department of Homeland Security, and saying how wonderful ICE is and they're doing this amazing job and you should know this. Why don't you know this type thing? So it was almost, you could read it as a barbed attack on Kristi Noem, who some people say, her job could be a little bit at risk. Some people said Pam Bondi, but they seem to be safe enough at the moment. Here is a reaction by Simon Marks, who is one of my favorite journalists working, a British journalist in the United States on this for LBC. He synopsizes some of the speech. It was still going on when he was doing this talking.
But he's mentioned a heck of a lot of other things. I think that there was a bit of news in there, accidentally. I think he committed a bit of news there that we were just hearing when he talked about the Board of Peace, where he said, I wish the United Nations could do more. We wouldn't need the Board of Peace. That is the first public intimation by President Trump that he sees this Board of Peace now, which of course was set up to produce some sort of structure to govern post-conflict Gaza. He sees it as much more than that now. He sees it as an alternative to the United Nations Security Council. So that, I think, is going to worry the Prime Minister.
That's a really important observation, that he actually explicitly linked the Board of Peace to the UN and how it's kind of a replacement of the UN. Wow.
Minister, French President Emmanuel Macron, and other world leaders who have so far said they won't be forking out $1 billion and sending it to President Trump to join the Board of Peace. Fresh questions in all of that for Tony Blair, the man who said when he was departing Florida last night that he doesn't care about the Nobel Peace Prize, was once again going on and on and on about how he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He claimed that the leaders of every country whose wars, and they weren't wars, many of them, that he had resolved had nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. That's actually factually inaccurate. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi didn't back him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and it cost the Indian Prime Minister his relationship with President Trump. He clearly has forgotten the name of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, because he now keeps referring to her as that woman.
And this is something he does very often. He doesn't know the names of countries and people. I know he's a president and blah, 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 and he has a lot to remember, but he's old, he's arguably demented, and he's struggling to remember names and places, and he's muddling up. He kept calling Greenland today Iceland. Over and over, he called it Iceland. And, if Joe Biden had done that, everyone would have gone nuts, but Fox News apparently doesn't care.
But he says that he was very grateful that she decided that she didn't deserve the Nobel Peace Prize, but he deserved it. There have been extraordinary comments about...
We can't even remember the name of the woman who gave him the Nobel Peace Prize the other day. Outrageous.
The killing in Minneapolis of 37-year-old motorist Renee Nicole Good. He described it as a tragedy, and he then went on to say, extraordinarily, that he hopes that particularly Nicole Good's father, who reporters say was a Trump supporter in the 2024 presidential election, is still a Trump supporter, despite what happened to his daughter at the hands of that trigger-happy ICE agent, who, of course, is not being investigated by the Department of Justice in relation to her killing. And the other big news, Ian, coming out of this, and I am not making this up, is that he has revealed that when he changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, he actually suggested to his aides that it should be changed to the Gulf of Trump. The aides pushed back and told him that they didn't think that was a good idea, so he went with the Gulf of America. But now he thinks it's not too late to change the name from the Gulf of America to the Gulf of Trump. I have no idea what the Prime Minister and European leaders, if they are trying to sit through this and watch it, I have no idea what they're making of it. I see CNN has now dipped out of it. They've given up at almost, I guess, the 1 hour mark. He's not sounding... First of all, he doesn't sound particularly cogent, as I think everyone can hear. And secondly, he's not at all sounding like a man in a mood for compromise or in much of a mood for dialogue in Davos. But again, if he ever...
Just unbelievable. To spend time talking about how the Gulf of Mexico is called the Gulf of America now, but it should actually be called the Gulf of Trump, but they stopped me from calling it that. But I think it's not too late for me to actually call it the Gulf of Trump. Tells you pretty much you need everything you need to know about who Donald Trump is, the most narcissistic person in the world. I don't understand how people can still support him. So he's got this border peace he's put on the Belarusian dictator. Lukashenko has now signed that, which means that he signed up people to Trump's border peace. Currently consists of the US, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Albania, and Uzbekistan. So that's good. And Keir Starmer is concerned by Putin and Lukashenko being invited to the border peace. The UK is not joining the board as things stand. Spokesperson says that UK's commitment to the UN is unwavering, and Trump's peace board is falling apart only 48 hours before the signing ceremony. So we'll have to see what he makes of it in Davos. Now, this is a speech he made last night, and honestly, I'm just going to play you like a minute of this. I just think, really, this is the president of the United States?
We had in my area in Queens, I grew up in Queens, we had a place called Creedmoor. Creedmoor, did anybody know that? Creedmoor. It was a big, I said, Mom, why are those bars on the building? I used to play Little League baseball there, a place called Cunningham Park. He was quite the baseball player, you wouldn't believe. But I said to my mother, Mom, she would be there, always there for me. She said, son, you could be a professional baseball player. I said, thanks, Mom. I said, why are those bars on the windows? Big building, big, powerful building. It loomed over the park, actually. She said, well, people that are very sick are in that building. I said, boy, I used to always look at that building and I'd see this big building, big, tall building. It loomed over the park. It was sort of, now that I think it was a pretty unfriendly sight, but I'll never forget. I don't know if it's still there.
Anyway, that's a minute you and I will never get back. So Derek Taylor says he's been rambling incoherent for 50 minutes straight. Right now, he's talking about mental institutions and how his mum once told him he could be a great baseball player. He's just completely gone. Here's a clip about Trump's mum saying he could be a baseball player before explaining what a mental institution is. That's the president of the United States. Right. But there were some pretty important things thrown in there. And this is one of them from last night that is worthy of note. Let's listen.
Minnesota, down, way down, even though everything's a fight, you know. because they want to keep those people that are lying on the floor. They want to keep those people in Minnesota, but they really don't. I don't think the real people of Minnesota, very corrupt place, and the elections are totally corrupt. I feel I won it all 3 times. Nobody's won that state since Richard Nixon. It's a rigged state. And the Somalians vote as one group, even if they're not citizens, and they vote as one group. And, you get 600,000 votes against you. They all ought to get the hell out of here. They're bad for our country.
So essentially what he's doing there, the implication, if we were to use a bit of inference there, I think it's quite right to say the reason that ICE has gone into Minnesota, it's a blue city, it's a blue state. Minneapolis is a blue city, and the Somalians, they vote Democrat, and he felt he should have won that election, but they cheated, and so he's getting revenge. It's because in Trump's mind, he won Minnesota, and this is payback. Everything happening in Minnesota, Rene Good's death, the ICE raids, all of it is payback for losing the election in Minnesota. That is what is going on there. Anyway, just to go back to just compare that. So although I'm not going to go on to this speech yet, like the 2 speeches last night, his big press conference, 104 minutes of rambling nonsense. And then today in Davos, Trump's on the stage right now and the room feels like a waiting room, low energy delivery, 0 reaction. He's used to crowds that clap on cue, not leaders who just stare back. And I think that's probably fairly accurate. Look, I love it. Even Channel 4, I meant to show you this yesterday. Channel 4, which is one of our main TV stations, Channel 4 News is probably the best news on terrestrial TV in the UK. Update, the BBC has said that they would give us, so they said Channel 4 are trolling Donald Trump. Because we did not win the BAFTA, which is like a Oscars for TV in the UK, because we did not win the BAFTA for best TV channel ever, we've decided to try and claim ITV, which is another TV channel, as ours. This is like taking a mickey out of, Trump not getting the Nobel Peace Prize and trying to take Greenland and that kind of stuff. Like, just Channel 4, their official Twitter handle is just going to town on taking the mickey out of Trump. Update, the BBC has said they would give us one of their BAFTAs to calm us down. Just absolutely brilliant. Channel 4, chef's kiss. I love a bit of Channel 4, so that's great stuff. Right, anyway, let's go to Howard Lutnick here, the Commerce Secretary, Lutnick. Just pretty incredible. I could play you all of this, but I won't just for time's sake. But the Trump administration and I are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's failed. It's a failed policy. He's taught. Actually, I do want to play you a bit of this because I think this is an insight into the new type of imperialism of the United States, which is globalism has failed us. He's not talked about the world. Globalization has failed us, and therefore we're going to change things. But even though it might have been good for you guys,
well, I think you should start at a much higher level. Okay. We are in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind.
This is really, you need to understand, you need to unpick some of these things to work out what's going on here. What he's saying is that globalization's really worked for the world, but it's not been good enough for the United States. We've been left behind because we're getting cheap stuff from abroad. Well, yeah, that's your benefit, is that you're getting cheap stuff. If you want more expensive stuff because it's made in the United States, fair enough. But imagine you're going to have huge inflation. And this is the whole thing to do with tariffs and onshoring is that globalization leads to cheap goods as we've got labor market of the entire world rather than just your country, right? But it's the way it's phrased here.
Has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind.
So even though the world is a better place, he doesn't care about the world being a better place. Now, of course, that's America first, but it's the idea that we are going to change the world's systems so that it is better for us, even though it might suck for you guys. Because don't care about you guys. It's all about us.
And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine.
So on and so forth. As Gandalf here says, listen to this painfully awkward defensive mumbling from Lutnick. Outside the MAGA echo chamber and away from Fox News worship, the arguments collapse instantly. You can almost hear the room thinking, please stop talking. The silence of this is the sound of someone hearing himself from the outside and realizing far too late how completely unhinged he sounds. Now, what's interesting, the reason I talk about Lutnick here is because apparently tensions have flared at Davos at a dinner as the US trade chief faces a backlash. So at an exclusive World Economic Forum dinner in Davos on Tuesday night, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick sparked a wave of negative reactions after delivering sharply critical remarks about European economies. His comments reportedly drew boos from attendees, with the US Commerce Department claiming that former US Vice President and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Al Gore was among those who booed him. The tone of the evening grew even more heated when Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, is said to have walked out in protest following Lutnick's remarks. The dinner, hosted by BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, underscored the growing strains in transatlantic relations and disagreements over issues like Greenland, and tariff threats loom large ahead of major speeches at the forum. So not going down well, it seems. Now, Trump has said, and before we get on to Chagos, Greenland, and everything else, another example of where Trump's been going with his speeches and his lies comes in this example. Lewis Goodall from the news agents says, one thing I've noticed is that the more windmills, this is Trump, sorry, Trump says, one thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing. China makes almost all of the windmills, and yet I haven't been able to find any wind farms in China. Now, this has been pointed out previously to be absolutely incorrect. It's not true that there's a correlation between the more windmills you have and the more money you lose. And also, it's completely untrue that China has no wind farms. The fact is that China has by far the largest installed wind power capacity in the world, more than any other country. So he's not just wrong. He's like 100% wrong. Like, Trump is not just lying. He's saying black is white and white is black. He's like living in opposite world. And this is dangerous because, you know, if you're someone that's going to believe what he says, you're just going to have a completely distorted sense of reality. And we're living at a time when, and this, I wanted to share this with you just separately because, you know, I'm interested in renewables. I love renewables. I find them fascinating. Amazing wind tech. Ireland is decommissioning its oldest wind farm. So they've got 21 wind turbines in this old farm. They're decommissioning it to make way for new technology. And the efficiency leap is staggering. Just one of the new turbines they're going to put up to replace the 21 turbine farm, just one new turbine will generate more power than the entire 21 turbines that exist in the old farm. That is how much more efficient wind technology and indeed solar technology has become. It is going on at leaps and bounds, and it is simply ridiculous to assert that you're losing money if you are if you're going to put up wind turbines. And it also is interesting that Trump has now lost 3 court cases regarding wind farms that he has shut down in the United States as they are being built, and they have been, I think, ordered to be restarted again. Now, Justin Wolf, as the Economist, says, I'm still surprised by anyone who defends Trump's tariff policy. We hear as well that Trump confirmed what European officials have long suspected, that last year he raised tariffs on Switzerland after a phone call with the country's president because, quote, she rubbed me up the wrong way. She rubbed me the wrong way. This idea that international diplomacy and foreign policy is being defined by what mood Trump is in and whether he likes the person he's speaking to. This is why the UK got a pretty good trade deal with the US compared to the EU, because he just likes Keir Starmer a little bit. and he likes the royal family. Now, that's probably a good segue to go into the next section, which is on, and I've just shut that down. So let's now bring this back up. We're going to go back to the Chagos Islands. And this is pretty important from a British point of view, but actually what's taken place today in Parliament is significant. So the reason I got this before Greenland is because, well, from my personal point of view, we might have seen a bit of an inflection point with the relationship between Keir Starmer and the British government and Trump and the United States government. So if you remember, I'm not going to go over it again. We have this Chagos deal, which Trump and Marco Rubio recommended. They commended, said it was great. It's good for both countries back in both February and May last year. And then just 2 days ago, Trump slagged off the UK for its stupidity over the Chagos deal. So he's changed his mind completely, which was an opportunity. And I said that the reason why this happened is to throw a hand grenade into British politics, because he knew that reform and the Conservatives would jump on Keir Starmer. Now, what's very interesting is my speculation that the rationale for Trump was to create political opportunism that was to the benefit of the opposition parties in Britain is what Keir Starmer has officially said today. Fascinating, right? And we're going to come to that in a second. Dan Hodges, who's sometimes quite often very critical, he says it's quite incredible to see many so-called patriots, scare quote, actively siding with a foreign head of state purely because Starmer is the target. I bow to no one in my criticism of our prime minister, but we are still British, right? A sovereign power, not the 51st state. Now, this is one of the problems I see, is that so many people have jumped on Keir Starmer over Chagos because they see what Trump has said in an opportunistic way, and none more so than the Greenland leader, Kemi Badenoch here, who said her piece, and this is what Keir Starmer said in reply, and I think it's pretty staggering.
Should the Chagosians?
Mr. Speaker, I've made out my position on Greenland absolutely clear on Monday and a moment ago. President Trump deployed words on Chagos yesterday that were different to his previous words of welcome and support.
So first of all, Keir Starmer officially in Parliament has said Donald Trump said one thing before and he said something different just the other day. So what's going on there? So I'm going to give you a bit of priming here. Keir Starmer is changing his position on Trump quite clearly and obviously here, because he's just about to criticize Trump and criticize opposition parliamentarians for opportunistically jumping on the bandwagon that Trump has condoning the grenade that Trump has thrown into British politics.
When I met him in the White House, he deployed those words yesterday for the express purpose of putting pressure on me and Britain in relation to my values and principles on the future of Greenland.
Wow. Okay, so people have been whinging that Keir Starmer has been too weak on Trump, and I've explained why that's been the case, but I've also said you might see now a change whereby he's got to side with Europe. He's got to make a choice. Which side are you going to go with? And even though we don't have the security blanket of Europe, I think it's wise to side with Europe. That is what he's doing. He has just claimed that Donald Trump said something in order to denigrate the British position on Greenland. Like, this is a very, now I don't know if Trump's going to hear this, but this is really freaking significant in my opinion.
He deployed those words yesterday for the express purpose of putting pressure on me and Britain in relation to my values and principles on the future of Greenland. Mr. Speaker, he wants me to yield on my position, and I'm not going to do so. Given that that was his express purpose, I'm surprised the leader of the opposition has jumped on the bandwagon.
That's what I said.
I had understood her position. Mr. Speaker, I had understood her position to be that she supported the government's position on the future of Greenland. Now she appears to support words by President Trump to undermine the government's position on the future of Greenland. She's chosen naked opportunism over the national interest.
I think that is remarkable. Honestly, I think that's a really important point in UK political history right now, or at least, honestly, it is big. And then she goes at it again, Kemi Badenoch, and he has another response, which I think is it reiterates it. So this is a very, like, he wrote those words were written, right? He or his aides wrote those words. They are like the express intention, I think, was what he talked about in terms of what Trump was wanting. Like, that this is big.
Why doesn't he just scrap this terrible deal and put the money into our armed forces?
The words from President Trump were expressly intended to put pressure on me to yield on my principle. What he said about Chagos was literally in the same sentence as what he said about Greenland. That was his purpose. And the future of Greenland is a binary issue that is splitting the world at the moment with material consequences. I've been clear and consistent in my position on the future of Greenland. The future is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone. The leader of the opposition has taken 3 positions in 10 days. 10 days ago, she said Greenland was, in her words, a second-order issue. 4 days ago, she said she supported our position on Greenland. Now she's backing arguments intended to undermine our position, Britain's position on Greenland. This is an important national moment, and yet again, the leader of the opposition has shown she is incapable of rising to it.
Now, what was really interesting, now I don't want to get too much into British politics, but Beth Rigby was talking about how the opposition leader, Kemi Badenoch, really missed the gravity and also the narrative here. And it was, you know, it was not good from Badenoch, and actually Keir Starmer did a really good job. Beth Rigby analysis: Starmer is statesman-like at PMQs and Badenoch missed the moment. And that's coming from Sky News' Beth Rigby, who's pretty you know, down the middle there, and I think I think does a pretty good job in general. So I think Starmer's done a really decent job in Parliament there. Now, this is the point that I was kind of making earlier. It used to be the case that or that someone else made earlier. It used to be the case that in the midst of an international crisis, His Majesty's loyal opposition would support the government in confronting a foreign aggressor. This post, so Kemi Badenoch talking about how Trump is right over Chagos and siding up with Mike Johnson and whatnot from the leader of the opposition. This post makes one question whether the Conservatives, the Tories, put Trump up to his incendiary Chagos post to undermine the Prime Minister. So yeah, there is a sense of that. Now, Andrew Neil, as I mentioned yesterday, very conservative commentator, saying from what he's just said in the White House, Donald Trump seems to think we're selling the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Quote, do the Brits need the money? So this is a really interesting point, that actually it could be that Donald Trump he's forgotten the deal as it was last February and last May, when he commended the deal, when Secretary of State Marco Rubio commended the deal. And I showed you the quotes from them yesterday. He's forgotten that. And now someone seems to have either led him down a garden path, or he's just completely misremembered what the deal is. And it seems to be us selling the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, because do the Brits need the money? Yes, we need the money. We're paying them in order for us to be able to keep, you know, releasing the island from them. Trump doesn't understand the deal, which he's saying is like rank stupidity. Unbelievable. Of course, the UK is surrendering any sovereignty and paying Mauritius up to 34 billion over the next 100 years to lease back the islands in what must be the worst deal any government has ever made in modern times. So Andrew Neil's not a fan of it. You own something that nobody can take from you, whatever international lawyers say. You give it away to a country of which it has never been a part, then you pay billions to lease it back. Bonkers. So Andrew Neil's not a fan of this deal. I mean, the issue here is you own something that nobody can take away from you, whatever international lawyers say, is the point. is that both the last government and this government recognize that international law is not on the British side. And so that's why they're giving it back and then leasing it off Mauritius. But Andrew Neil here is saying, well, it doesn't matter what international lawyers say, you just keep it yourself. Well, actually, that was my point, is do we agree that we stand by international law? Because if we do, then we argue that the US invading Greenland's a bad idea and Russia invading Ukraine's a bad idea, and we give the Chagos Islands back. You can't have both. You can't say international law is irrelevant, but I'm really annoyed about Greenland and Ukraine. You can't do that, because international law is relevant there and it's relevant with the Chagos Islands. And that's what frustrates me, is that all the people that sit on the right in the UK who are shouting about how the UK shouldn't be giving the Chagos Islands back just are advocating for imperialism. And yet they're really angry about Greenland and Ukraine. So yeah, incredible. Keir Starmer says he won't yield on UK's position on Greenland under pressure from the US president, which I think was well stated. He accuses Badenoch of naked opportunism and jumping on the bandwagon. And the shift in tone from the usually cautious Starmer towards the US president. This is a prime minister who chooses his words very carefully. So any change is significant. Starmer reveals that Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen will be visiting the UK on Thursday, presumably with Greenland at the top of the agenda. So Starmer has not gone to Davos. He sent the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's remained in in London, Prime Minister's question time. Nigel Farage has gone to Davos, presumably to meet his best mate Trump. Mette Frederiksen is coming to visit the UK on Thursday. That is freaking significant. If you're wondering about the UK's direction going forward, it is definitely back towards Europe. And it is definitely away from the United States. I can't imagine the conversations that have been taking place inside sort of number 10 Downing Street and with the aides of Keir Starmer, because there's no doubt in my mind that Keir Starmer's aides and Keir Starmer himself would be absolutely excoriating of the President of the United States in private. Right, now let's get on to Greenland. Hopefully all of that makes sense already. I'm going to close all of these. I've got so many tabs open. Hopefully it was useful to get an insight into the Chagos situation with regard to Starmer, so we understand the British position. Now we're going to go forward to what Donald Trump is saying, and I can't tell you, this man is just nuts. He is nuts. So what we're going to see is several examples of Trump calling Greenland Iceland over and over, and also just talking in his usual sense.
I don't know that they'd be there for us. They're not there for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. I mean, our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money. But that dip is peanuts compared to what it's gone up. And we don't know that.
So Iceland, that's weird. Yeah, so here we have him again.
Decades. But the problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us if we gave.
Article 5 has only been invoked one time, as you all know, after 9/11, and Denmark, particularly, outside of the Americans and the British, Denmark had the highest deaths per capita in terms of those troops who died in Afghanistan on behalf of the United States and their war on terror. Denmark and all the other NATO forces came to the assistance of the United States. So he is really offensive in what he says here, that we wouldn't come to their assistance. How dare he say that when people have died on behalf of the US invocation of Article 5? How dare he say that? I mean, this is where someone should heckle him in the audience. And this is where he should take questions that show his rank ignorance on the matter.
Percent. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us if we gave them the call. Gentlemen, we are being attacked. We're under attack by such and such a nation. I know them all very well. I'm not sure that they'd be there. I know we'd be there for them. I don't know that they'd be there for us. So with all of the money we expend, with all of the blood, sweat, and tears, I don't know that they'd be there for us. They're not there for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. I mean, our stock market took the first dip.
So, yeah, Iceland, of course. Yeah, of course, they're not there. They're not, you're right. NATO aren't there for you on Iceland because Iceland's got nothing to do with this, you absolute Egypt. But he
doing it, I'm helping.
But he doesn't learn. He still bangs on about Iceland later.
Doing it, I'm helping Europe. I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me.
Iceland loves him.
They called me daddy, right? Last time.
Iceland called. It wasn't Greenland that called you daddy anyway. It was Mark Rutte from NATO, the Secretary General of NATO, and it wasn't Greenland, and it certainly wasn't Iceland. But anyway,
Iceland, they loved me. They called me daddy, right? Last time. Very smart man said, he's our daddy. He's running
that is
it.
Mark
I
Rutte.
was like running it. I went from running it to being a terrible human being. Doing it, I'm helping.
Right, it's just trying to make sense of what he says. Quite incredible. So here we have a little bit more.
Disrespect. But every NATO ally has an obligation to be able to defend their own territory. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. We're a great power, much greater than people even understand. I think they found that out 2 weeks ago in Venezuela. We saw this in World War II when Denmark fell to Germany after just 6 hours of fighting and was totally unable to defend either itself or Greenland. So the United States was then compelled, we did it, we felt an obligation to do it, to send our own forces to hold the Greenland territory, and hold it we did at great cost and expense. They didn't have a chance of getting on it, and they tried. Denmark knows that. We literally set up bases on Greenland for Denmark. We fought for Denmark. We weren't fighting for anyone else. We were fighting to save it for Denmark. Big, beautiful piece of ice. It's hard to call it land. It's a big piece of ice. But we saved Greenland.
Right. So there you go. This idea that he saved Greenland. I mean, yeah. Trump creates fake history and claims that we gave Greenland back after World War II. That is what Putin does. This is what Hitler did. Reality, we never owned it. We never conquered it. Never gave it back. Greenland was Danish territory before, during, and after World War II. We merely stationed troops there to help defend America. Why do Republicans let Trump continue to tell blatant lies? It's just this idea, just everything about what he says is just largely incorrect. Then he goes on to have a go at Canada.
To just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your prime minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. What we did to...
So threatening Mark Carney. Anyway, Mark Carney's speech yesterday went down really, really well. I've got one clip from it, but, advise you to watch it all. Alistair Campbell says, look, the horror of this monstrosity, with the chuckles of the sycophants in the front row, so Alistair Campbell is there, by the way, is even worse close up. Now into total ramble mode, audience is bemused and bored, speaks like a mafia boss on Greenland. And then we have Rory Stewart, his podcast colleague, is also at the World Economic Forum, is also in the audience, saying one of the things I had not appreciated until I was in the room was how a flurry of misleading and often fake statistics embedded with a direct mafia demand for Greenland or Iceland can simultaneously brutalize the world order whilst also being repetitive, flat, and boring. So there's a lot of people saying that both the speech yesterday and today, just boring, uninspiring, yet also dangerous, of course. But he must be very tired. Like literally, he might, like any human, I think, would be tired. And he's a particularly old man. He's been flown across the Atlantic. He's been, he was up at a game 2 nights ago, late, giving a speech there, I think. Was that the one that was also booed a bit? Anyway, so Tim Miller says, so the gist of the speech here is that Trump is going to use isn't going to use excessive force to take Greenland. Instead, he wants Denmark to give it to us because of past wars that he dodged. And if they don't give it to us, he will engage in economic war with our allies and tax our citizens. And that's a pretty good synopsis, I think, of Trump's position on Greenland now. Now, Pippa Carrera says, Donald Trump rules out using force to acquire Greenland, but still says he wants the right title and ownership of the territory. So that's a kind of, he speaks like a real estate mogul, right? That's how he sees it. He sees that as a piece of real estate that, well, we're the United States, we can buy that. Just like I can go and buy something in New York, I can buy a nation in the globe. That's not how it works. International yeah, it is how it works, especially if I say so. And that's kind of where we're at, where you've got a real estate mogul saying that the world does work like a big New York. And that's that. Quote, we probably won't do anything unless I didn't decide to use, we probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be frankly unstoppable, but I won't do that. Whether that is a definite declaration that the US won't use force, I don't know. Noting relief among the audience in Davos, he adds, that's probably the biggest statement I made because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. He doesn't want to use force, but if it's not for sale, then what's he left doing, saying that he won't be able to back down? Greenland will be his. A quote here, all we're asking is for Greenland, including the right title and ownership, because you need ownership to defend it. You can't defend it on a lease. Number one, legally, it's not defensible that way. And number two, psychologically, who the hell wants to defend a license agreement or a lease? Jim Shooter says, with this logic, Trump just dismissed the basis of every mutual defense treaty the US is party to. NATO, Japan, South Korea, Philippines should all be listening. So essentially, if you unpick what he's really saying when he says, well, you're not going to defend a lease, why? Well, you need to own something in order to defend it. Well, then why the hell did everyone go and support the US in Afghanistan in defending what? The US against the war on terror? Well, you can go and defend that, and people can die as a result of doing that. So you are just essentially throwing away all military alliances. Right, this was sickening. So US members of Congress, you got Paula Luna here, Annalena Paula Luna, who is an absolute lunatic. You got Andy Ogles here, and this is George Simeon, the freaking ultra-right Romanian guy that ran for president. Luckily didn't win because Nicolae Dan won. What the hell are they doing, rubbing shoulders? And why are they cutting a cake of Greenland with a bloody flag of the United States? This is sickening. If I was a Greenlander and I saw this, I would be absolutely incandescent with rage and deeply upset. Andy Ogles was on Newsnight last night and he was an absolute buffoon, right? This guy there. Andy Ogles is a guy who has Christmas cards of him, his wife, and 4 kids with assault rifles. Yay, Merry Christmas. And daughter with a pink assault rifle. You're like, yeah, that's who Andy Ogles is, right? Okay, just honestly, that is sickening. Really, really not a fan of that at all. US members of Congress and the leader of Romania's far-right pro-Russian AUR party, so pro-Russian, long ago known to be a Russian agent, cutting pieces off a Greenland cake. Reality has been warped to the point it no longer feels real. What's the world become when that is what you see? Now, Victoria Derbyshire here with Andy Ogles.
A recent poll of Greenlanders suggested only 6% of Greenlanders want their country to become part of the US. 85% are against that. You've got to listen to those people. You're a democratic country. They're a democratic country. They're allies in NATO.
Yeah, and again, I've had the opportunity, the privilege to host individuals, leaders from the community, from Greenland in my office here in the States. They distinctly, harshly disagree with your sentiment, but that's to be expected.
It's not my sentiment.
The globalists do not want to see.
I love that. It's not my sentiment. It's 86% of bloody Greenlanders. It's not my sentiment that they don't want you there, or 85%. And he's like, oh, I've had people in my office who freaking Greenlanders who freaking love it.
sentiment, but that's to be expected.
It's not my
the globalists
sentiment.
do not want to see.
Forgive me, it's not my
NATO
sentiment.
being, essentially put in its place. And again, what you're seeing is the United States is leading from a position of strength.
Okay.
And Denmark and NATO is having trouble reconciling with that because at the end of the day, it's the United States are going to keep Russia and China at bay.
Yeah. President Trump appears to be good friends with President Putin.
Boom. President Trump appears to be good friends with Putin. Not sure that Andy Ogles really gives one damn about that, though. And I love this. It's Maria Bartiromo giving some truth on Fox News. Who would have thought? And then Howard Nutlick being, I don't know, just typically testicular.
Go both ways.
What would you say if one of our allies said, look, we're going to go in and take over another country, even though the country said we're not interested? I mean, we talk all day and every day about evil action from Putin going into Ukraine. I mean,
yes.
People are looking at this and saying, how is it possible that the U.S. can acquire another country, even though they're pushing back?
I don't remember Greenland being another country. We're not taking over Denmark.
His answer is, I don't remember Greenland being another country. I don't remember Greenland being another country. What, is it your country? No, but it's not another country. It's just a bit of land. Yeah, but it's in the territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. Yeah, and Denmark's another country. Yeah, but it's not. Greenland's not a country. I don't remember Greenland being a country. That's his answer. I can justify invading Greenland because I don't remember it being another country. Jesus wept.
Saying, how is it possible that the U.S. can acquire another country, even though they're pushing back?
I don't remember Greenland being another country. We're not taking over Denmark. It's just Greenland is in our hemisphere. It's far, far
that's all right, then.
Denmark, as we know. And
do you know Argentina's in your hemisphere? Brazil's in your hemisphere. Are you going to invade them? Is it okay to invade them? In fact, why split the hemisphere into west and east? Why not just do northern hemisphere? Why not just take over every country in the northern hemisphere? Because it's in your hemisphere. Like, what are you doing? Arbitrarily cutting the world in half and saying, well, we're in that half, and therefore everything in that world is part of our hemisphere, and we therefore have divine right to invade it and own it. Especially as I don't consider any of these places. Brazil's not really a country, is it? Is Brazil a country? Yeah, it is. No, it's not. No. It's just I don't remember it being a country anyway. So it's ours now. It's in our hemisphere. And let's just divide the hemisphere instead of doing north, south, or east, west. Let's do it diagonally. Let's put Australia in America's hemisphere. If we just cut the world that way, right? Australia, you're ours now. You're in our hemisphere. No, we're not. Yes, you are. We've got a new, Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, sod them. We've got the Tropic of Nutlick and the Tropic of Scott Bessent and Knob. And we've got these tropics, and we've got the equator going that way round the world. And it turns out Australia's now in our hemisphere. So you're ours now, Buster. Nice one, mate. What an absolute idiot.
It's 57,000 people, right, who are close to America, and it's important for us to make sure we protect the Western Hemisphere. The strength of America in the Western Hemisphere is vital
does that.
for the world. When America shines, the world shines. We showed you that throughout 2025. I think the president's going to come and talk about it. He's going to meet with the European leaders. He's going to talk to them, and my guess is they'll work it out. But he wants them at the table. He wants them serious. Go both ways.
What would you say if one of our...
Thank you, Bartiromo, for being vaguely sensible there and showing that gibbering buffoon a sense of, his own insanity. Right. This is getting Scott Bessent in a lot of trouble and is arguably a bit of a hand grenade in international diplomacy right now.
The size, Denmark's investment in U.S. Treasury bonds, like Denmark itself, is irrelevant. That it's less than $100 million. They've been selling treasury.
Okay. I'm going to play that to you again in a second. So the idea here is that Europe is threatening to, or some people are saying Europe are going to sell off treasuries, bonds, and that's going to destabilize the American economy and devalue the dollar, as I explained yesterday. And some people have said, well, Denmark have got a bunch of treasuries, US bonds, they could sell them off. And he says the following in answer to that, which is absolutely staggering.
The size, Denmark's investment in U.S. Treasury bonds, like Denmark itself, is irrelevant.
He has literally just called Denmark irrelevant. And this has not gone down well. As Faisal Islam from the BBC says, this sort of rhetoric not going down too well among Europeans here at Davos, especially as Bessent is respected here as a grown-up. He's one that people think, he's vaguely sensible sometimes when he speaks. He sort of knows what he's talking about and isn't quite as batshit crazy as, say, Trump. But no. Just spoken to Chancellor Rachel Reeves here in Davos, also trying to be diplomatic, but clearly very frustrated at the trade war talk now re-emerging, asserting that the UK will not be buffeted around by anyone, and saying that she would never rule anything out in terms of joining the European retaliation, and talk to me about assuring with Trump's Commerce Secretary that there should be no increase in US tariffs against the UK. Just my goodness. But Scott Bessent calling Denmark irrelevant. As the Guardian says, EU chief says Europe needs to abandon caution after US Treasury Secretary calls Denmark irrelevant. Wow. Just, that is not going to help matters, that is for sure. So Scott Bessent says, US Treasury, we're not putting a 10% tariff on Greenland. We're putting a 10% tariff on 8 countries that chose to send troops to Greenland. One, they were sent to shore up Greenland from threats against Russia and China, just as was requested by Donald Trump, or moaned at that there was not enough security. So they're going to do something about that. 2, we get 10% tariff on the UK because we sent 1 military officer to Greenland. This is so outrageous that it, honestly, I'm at the point where just sod it. Like, it's going to be painful, but the UK just has to, and Europe just have to stand up for themselves at the moment. And hopefully that would then cause such a rupture in the American political establishment that Republican lawmakers will finally come out and be rattled into criticism of Trump. And it might give, where are the Democrats at the moment? I've not heard Democrats say anything apart from Gavin Newsom. And he was actually attacking Europe for not having a spine rather than attacking. I mean, it is given that he's against Trump. But just here's another example. I mean, he's supposed to be the adult in the room, Scott Bessent, but check out how completely living in a different world this man is.
We are going to give guidance at some point to see what is a mom and pop that someone, maybe your parents for their retirement, about 5, 10, 12 homes. So we don't want to push the mom and pops out. We just want to push everyone else out.
Let's just oh man, I love it when these rich elites, like, he's got what he owns, farms up in wherever, soybean farms that he owns. He keeps saying he's a farmer. He's not. He just owns a whole ton of land. Like, I don't know, venture capital firms or whatever. He's just got an absolute ton of money, this guy. And he's talking about mom and pop. So for those people who don't live in the US, that's generally like a mom and pop store is this kind of small business, not very well off, not some kind of big corporation. You just got a little business tinkering along, and if you want to support the mum and pop businesses, you want to do things that help out small and medium-sized businesses. He says to Maria Bartiromo there, he says, you got your mum and pop who, they've got a retirement, they might have 5, 10, 12 houses. Who's mum and pop? Who's like working class parents own 5, 10, 12 houses? What bloody planet are you living on? And you're supposed to be making your country, the United States of America, better for the working class there. You don't even understand what the working class is. The working class of this man is mum and pop who own a bloody half the town in real estate. It's absolutely incredible. Honestly, this sort of stuff blows my mind.
Retirement, about 5, someone, maybe your parents for their retirement, about 5, 10, 12 homes. So we don't want to push them.
Oh, I know Maria Bartiromo's parents probably have, but you're talking about mom and pop parents here.
That what is a mom and pop? That someone, maybe your parents for their retirement, about 5, 10, 12 homes. So
Bartiromo, do a better job of pushing back on that abject nonsense. So there you go. Right, moving on. Trump on Greenland. It's a very and stuff like this that I think is very revealing. Trump's talked about this with regard to Russia before, and how he says it's got 11 time zones. He can never lose to Ukraine. Ukraine's never going to win the war because Russia's a much bigger country. And he looks at the map, the Mercator projection map, 2D map of a globe, which makes everything far up north and far down south much bigger than it really is. So the landmass of Greenland, on, like I've shown you before, if you can go on websites that show you. So you know, Mercator projection site. Let's go to some kind of correct the map. Is this it? Sorry, I know you can't see what I'm doing here, so I want to make sure I get the right one. Yeah, no. There is a website. If anyone can find it, that would be very useful, where I can change where a nation is on the map, and you can see how big it actually is in terms of the other countries. I did know where it was. Anyway, if you move Greenland down from where it is to the middle of to the equator, then it's smaller than, what is it, Algeria or whatever. So the idea is that Trump possibly thinks that Greenland is just much bigger than it actually is, because he's looking at a 2D map. And he says, Trump said, and I don't know where this is a quote from, maybe from last night. This is from the 21st this morning. Yeah, this is probably last night. It's a very big piece of land. It's really cold, got a lot of ice on it. So it's not like we're going to put big real estate development there. But of course, with climate change, that's going to be changing, right? But anyway, I actually think he probably does think it's a big piece of real estate. Now I'm going to get back to this idea that, and I keep mentioning this because it's so important, that Starmer has been very careful on Trump and the United States because he doesn't have the security blanket of the EU. I've told this to you so many times. I've had arguments with people on my live streams who claim that, oh, you know, Brexit this, Brexit that. But I keep saying, look, economic, I'm not talking about anything else, just the economy. Brexit has harmed us economically. You can have arguments about sovereignty. I'd still argue about that, actually. Sovereignty and immigration and whatnot. And I think you'd actually lose those from practically what's happened. But from an abstract point of view, you could argue that Brexit would have been or could have been good for immigration and sovereignty. In the end, it wasn't good for immigration. Our immigration spiked as we took loads of brown-skinned people from East Asia instead of white-skinned people from East Europe in, and to a much larger degree. So people who are worried about immigration, I'm speaking from lots of people I know, family members and whatnot, who were like dead against sort of free movement of people and immigration, but then they're like dead against like boat people and brown skinned people now coming from abroad. It's like, well, actually that's worse because actually a Brexit and blah blah blah. And anyway, so immigration and sovereignty. Now we appear to have less sovereignty because we are unable to exert ourselves because we don't have the security blanket of the EU. Anyway, it's really interesting that, you know, I keep saying this and then having these arguments with people, but Macron has come out and said the same thing. Macron's allies say it plainly. Brexit is why Starmer is weak with Trump. Inside the EU, you have leverage. So yesterday, Macron, with his shades on, looking cool, comes out and he slams the United States because he can, because he's within the EU as a big 500 million person or market of 460 million. Brexit is why Starmer is weak with Trump. Inside the EU, you have leverage, a market of 460 million, and a trade bazooka. So this is a procurement thing that they can put into place. If the US goes too crazy, they can demand that the Europeans only procure from within Europe, which would be a kind of economic nuclear reaction to say Greenland. Outside it, you urge calm while others decide. Brexit left Britain weak, and Trump knows it. So Trump knows that the UK is weak on its own, is outside of the EU, and Starmer has to be somewhat appeasing. And that's exactly what has happened. So I've been explaining that to you guys for ages, and and that is still the case, although I think it's getting to a point where Starmer has to pick sides, and I think he is starting to pick sides. So it's really interesting. But it's interesting that the French there acknowledge that very, very obviously. Spain's member of European Parliament here is absolutely on fire. Irene Montero went nuclear in the European Parliament, accusing Europe of humiliating itself before Donald Trump. Quote, do you still believe that by helping the United States to commit its crimes, we will be safe? Bombing and sanctioning Iran will not bring freedom to women. It will bring oil to Trump. That is such a good... Trump doesn't care for female emancipation, does he? In Iran, he cares for Iranian oil. The policy of appeasement did not prevent the war. It only made the monster bigger. Trump is the Hitler of the 21st century. We must isolate the USA and leave NATO now, not help them bomb Iran. Have some dignity. Now, I presume she's probably sitting on the left there. But the idea here is that there's very much an appetite inside Europe to stand up for Europe against now the United States, not China, but the United States. Incredible. Now we hear that the European Parliament has actually suspended approval of the US-EU trade deal after Trump threatened the 10 to 25% tariffs on Europe and revived his push to take Greenland. EU lawmakers say Trump's Davos remarks violated the pact's terms. Quote, appeasement does not bring peace. It invites more aggression, and this would only embolden Trump and invite further increasingly reckless demands. I am demanding a robust response. We can try diplomacy, but we should not be afraid to hit Donald Trump where it hurts. He exploits hesitation and despises weakness. We need to hit him where it hurts. Europe is the end quote. Europe is now preparing a 93 billion euro counter tariff policy. This isn't diplomacy. It's Trump sabotaging a trade deal and global stability with reckless threats and imperial delusions, says Ed Krasenstein there. So that is interesting if that is officially been, they're giving that the kibosh. Then we have these yesterday, it was, although it's very much improved, and even Trump has referenced that, but initially markets were not looking good with Trump's rhetoric on Greenland. Some perspective, the S&P opened down 1.3% yesterday on Trump's Greenland saber rattling. That's 750 billion of wealth destroyed, roughly equal to estimates of the value of Greenland. So the idea that the US is going to offer $700 billion for Greenland, and that got wiped off the stock markets yesterday. So in dollar terms, his shenanigans have already cost the US one Greenland, and we've got nothing to show for it. Wow. So there is that there. That was from Justin Wolfers. Sorry, I was showing you the wrong one there. And then the dollar was down 1% after the first European pension fund dumps treasuries. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And whether that is a realistic option, but actually it looks like it is happening to some, at least limited degree. So anyway, right across the stock markets, American shares were struggling. Turns out that making an enemy of everyone all at once is not particularly a great idea. But, the bounce back could be on if Trump appears at least somewhat less bellicose. And here we have Tom Tillis, who is a Republican and some people are criticizing him here for this, because he is someone who's retiring now because, he's critical of Trump and recognizes that he'll be primaried and probably, wouldn't get in. So though he's critical of Trump, he's not really critical of Trump.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And to be clear, I'm not critical of the president. I'm critical of the bad advice he's getting on Greenland.
Okay, well,
So and he's not wrong there, by the way, but it is one and the same thing. Like, I'm not critical of president. I'm critical of the advice he's got. Yeah, but he's making those decisions. So, okay, but we could say that about all human beings. I'm not critical of Hitler. I'm critical of the life he had before this moment and all the advice he was getting, all the things he was reading. Okay, brilliant. Well, we can look at the philosophy of causality here, but the end result is Hitler ended up saying those things and doing those things. And if they were bad, then, prima facie, Hitler's bad. Now, we can talk about libertarian free will, and we can talk about volition and how that works, but that's a really big philosophical discussion. And just for the intents and purposes of doing global geopolitics on the fly here, I think letting Trump off on account of bad advisors is a cop-out. But it's also true. So there is also an issue with the people that Trump surrounds himself with. And Russ Fort and JD Vance and Peter Thiel and Stephen Miller and Andy Baker, all these people are really deeply troubling human beings, and Trump is surrounded by them, and they are having an effect on his decision making. Now, are trillions of dollars of US treasuries at risk of dumping? Danish pension fund ATPGEO Pension said it will sell all treasuries by month end, citing rising credit risk under President Trump. The fund stated that US finances are no longer sustainable due to weak fiscal discipline, a softer dollar, and a push for Greenland. European countries own 3.6 trillion in treasuries, or 40% of foreign holdings. I reported yesterday how this can weaken the dollar. It shows people don't have any faith in the US as a reliable economy or partner going forward. It makes borrowing unsustainable for the US. At least the costs will go up for new bonds, and also more expensive for all existing bonds as well are affected. And they're already spending an awful lot servicing their debt already. So none of this is good for the United States economy. If other countries follow and begin dumping treasuries, yields would spike, pushing US borrowing costs to unprecedented levels. Eventually, this could trigger an implosion of global financial markets. What is happening here? So there is an issue here, though. So although lots of people in the live chats have been saying, yeah, we need to have these big sales on US treasuries, it is not. It will be very damaging for the EU to do that. It will be very damaging for everyone. This is kind of like shooting yourself in the foot in order to shoot, Trump or the United States in the stomach or something like that. Yeah, it will give them some serious pain, but we will be feeling pain as well, big time. Here is TLDR News giving 3 arguments why there could be a problem for selling off treasuries en masse.
Huge fiscal crisis. So, could this actually happen? Well, while this idea might have an intuitive appeal, there are at least 3 big problems. First, while precise numbers are hard to come by, most of Europe's US assets are held by the private sector. So it's not really clear how European governments could force private institutions to sell their holdings without an unprecedented intervention. Second, even if European governments could somehow force the private sector's hand, a mass sell-off would probably force Europeans to accept large losses on their US assets, given they'd have to sell at discounts to find enough buyers. And third, while a crisis in the treasury market might screw the US, it would also screw Europe. This is because the American and European economies are deeply interdependent, especially when it comes to finance. This was very apparent in 2008. While the crisis obviously originated in America, European banks were actually more acutely affected, which is why about half of the Federal Reserve's liquidity support actually went to European, not American banks. This speaks to an oft overlooked element of that crisis. The Fed didn't just bail out America, it also sort of bailed out Europe. Anyway, you get the point. A mass sell-off of treasuries is essentially the financial equivalent of a nuclear strike, bringing with it the promise of mutually assured destruction. Nonetheless, there are other ways for Europe to weaponize its US assets.
And by the way, I see that, the pirate says the foot is not as bad as the stomach. That's why I used exactly that metaphor then, to say it would be bad for Europe, but not as bad as it would be for the US, but still it would be bad for Europe.
We see at least 3 less radical options. The first is a managed sell-off of treasuries held by the European public sector, including sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. This could push US borrowing costs up to uncomfortable levels without triggering a full-blown crisis, and allow Europe to exercise leverage steadily during any negotiations.
I reminded you that China has been steadily selling off US treasuries for some time now. And we hear today that we heard about the ATPGEO pension there from Denmark. But Reuters is reporting that Sweden's Elector pension fund, which has about $110 billion worth of assets under its management, has decided to divest most of its US treasury holdings. So that it is happening, it appears, at least to some degree.
The second is some sort of regulatory fiddle to make treasuries less attractive to the private sector. We don't want to get too nerdy here, but the most obvious move would be for the European Central Bank to assign what's known as a risk weight to treasuries. This would basically make treasuries less attractive to banks, which are legally required to hold a certain amount of risk-free assets. The third is a regulatory fiddle to make American stocks less attractive. Europeans love buying American stocks, and for good reason. The main American stock index, the S&P 500, has performed remarkably well over the past few decades. However, European governments could tempt European money away from US stocks into European ones by offering, say, preferential tax treatment for investors who invest in Europe. This might sound a bit heavy-handed, but it's an idea that European politicians are becoming increasingly interested in. In the UK, for instance, Chancellor Rachel Reeves was apparently considering something called a Brit ISA, which would have offered tax perks to Brits who invested in UK stocks. It's also worth noting that lots of countries already use tax perks to make their bonds more attractive. In the US, for instance, interest on treasuries is exempt from state taxes. So doing something similar to make your stock market more attractive doesn't feel like too much of a leap. This could be a particularly effective way of exercising leverage over Trump at the moment, given the US stock market is currently looking pretty bubbly, and a substantial redirection of European funds from America into European stocks could be the prick that pops it. This would be terrible news for the US economy, given how much it currently relies on wealthy Americans, but with less risk of spillover into Europe or systemic dysfunction in transatlantic financial markets. Now,
that I thought was a fairly decent synopsis there of what could happen going forward, and why it is going to be fairly difficult to get European entities to sell off American bonds on a mass scale. Of course, each bond you'd be selling off would be, less and less in value as you're flooding the market with these bonds, and so you are going to take a bit of a hit there in selling them off. But I just thought that would be useful for you. Now we're going to look at some other geopolitical shenanigans concerning stuff going on in Europe and elsewhere, and actually mention Ukraine a little bit. But also we're going to remain to begin with on Davos, and we're going to go to Mark Carney. So Mark Carney got a standing ovation at Davos, and those don't happen often, says Alistair Campbell. Brutally honest assessment of the situation Trump is creating for the world, and a new approach middle powers now need to take. One of those speeches worth reading in full. Check it out. I've got just a little excerpt from it here. Wow, never thought we would hear the level of honesty from a Western leader, and certainly not Canada, given the direction of Canada in the past 25 years. Canada's shift towards multi-alignment is quite clear, and this level of honesty from Carney on Western fiction about the old order will be warmly welcomed in much of the global South. So this is what Mark Carney had to say. Pay attention.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
So some really pointed rhetoric there concerning the United States. I mean, he didn't shy away from that. It was seen as a very impressive speech, Carney. He's like now the adult in the room, I think, very much so. And he's talking about this new world order. I've got my Canadian brothers in the live chat going at each other, Mitch Ashdown and Michael Buchar, discussing Canadian pipelines. Pipe down, boys, pipe down. See what I did there? See what I did? Be nice, be nice. I'm tone policing you. So what's very interesting, therefore, because really what Mark Carney is doing is talking about China a lot as well, and this realignment. And he talked previously, I showed you this speech of his from the other day, where he's like, we are going to be working in coalition of like-minded partners on different things. So we might be getting together with China over this, but obviously they suck at that, so we're going to be close with these guys over that, and so on and so forth. But that is moving away from this kind of hegemony, this global supreme power, where the United States is at the top for everything and dictates everything we do. So now we're going into this multi-alignment world where things are looking very, very different. And at the same time, China has come out and said their piece. Voices from China in Davos are applauded, which is pretty incredible. You wouldn't have thought that from a kind of a Swiss-based World Economic Forum that had previously been kind of in awe of the US hegemonic pyramid, if you like. Voices from China in Davos are applauded. Quote, the world cannot return to the law of the jungle where the strong prey on the weak. I mean, this is rich coming from China to an extent where, you know, they've got, and I misspoke yesterday when I said, I was talking about how if too many people around the world start free riding and having corruption and so on and so forth, then the entire system just fully breaks down. And I actually said China do things somewhat properly. Actually, that was a bit of a misspeak. And, you know, Michael Vuchart did take me to town on this in the video thread, and he's right to a degree. I was talking in like the very international, in the macro side of things, but actually when you drill down, China have a fishing militia which is horrendous. They got intellectual property rights that appear to be, you know, incredibly dubious, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that China does that are dodgy as you like, and so one needs to be careful when you're thinking, well, China are definitely the good guys here, and America seems to be, you know, Trump's America seems to be becoming the bad guys. But actually, you know, be warned. But anyway, China being applauded for this rhetoric is very, very interesting, because they're denigrating the idea that you got the law of the jungle where the US go into Venezuela and steal their leader and no one does anything about that, where they're talking about taking Greenland by hook or by crook. No one really knows what to do about that. And they are saying that we cannot return to that. So this is a pointed statement against the United States, but also kind of welcoming in those that the United States is at the moment pitting themselves against. So we have this idea that Trump is very successfully undoing NATO and pushing Europe towards China. It's quite incredible. China is willing, he says, to not be the not only be the world's factory, but also the world's market. We'll build your stuff and we'll buy your stuff. Globalization faces challenges from rising protectionism. China offers certainty amid uncertainties. This idea that I was talking to you yesterday about economic flourishing requires predictability and certainty. And the approach of Trump at the moment is one of chaos and uncertainty. If we can't rely on international laws, then, oh my goodness, you know, international economic markets and bonds and currencies and all these things are really challenged. China is the one that's offering certainty. Quite incredible. Undoubtedly, 2026 will see more Western leaders visiting China for cooperation. Now, that is a very big claim there, and I think it's true. And I think you're going to get more leaders going to China. You've had Mark Carney getting into bed with the Chinese there for economic reasons, because I guess they feel like, well, we've got no other option. Either we take an massive economic hit from what the US is doing to us, or we take that hit, but we mitigate that hit by improving relations with China, with the EU, with our other global friends, so on and so forth. We hear that Prime Minister Keir Starmer plans a Beijing visit next week. So just having heard that more leaders are going to go to China this next year, who's going to Beijing next week? Keir Starmer receives Mette Frederiksen on Thursday, goes to China next week to aim to revive the golden era business talks. Honestly, you're seeing a realignment. Tim Miller says of this, the leaders of France and Canada are giving speeches about how the world needs to reorient towards a more stable democracies like theirs. Denmark is telling us to go F off. Meanwhile, our president is a rambling mess at this presser, speaking as if none of that is happening. It's bizarre. Then you've got the Belgian Prime Minister here. Absolutely incredible.
People want to join the European Union. Yes. Nobody wants to join China. Nobody, no neighbor of the United States says, well, we want to join the United States. Nobody wants to. They want to join the European Union just because we have respect. We have the rule of law. We do speak softly.
And do you know what? He's right. And I think this is probably not talked about enough. Like, Europe gets denigrated as being weak here and this, that, and whatever. You ask any country around the world, what entity would you most like to join? Guaranteed the EU would be at the top there. Like, would you prefer to be subsumed by the United States? You can ask Greenlanders, they've told you. Greenlanders have said, we would prefer to be part of the EU than the United States. They've literally told you. I would be really interesting. Go and ask any country around the world. Say to, I don't know, South Africa, just go to South Africa and say, if you had to be subsumed by one entity, the United States, China, or the EU, what would you rather be a part of? I guarantee it would be the EU. Do you know why? Because as Cheryl says, the rule of law is key. And there is predictability in the EU. And, you know, sorry, just missing so many people are speaking. EU may speak softly, but we stand strong. Yeah, I just think, I thought that's really interesting there from Bart de Wever from Belgium. Yeah, not much more to add to that. Now, having said that, there's a bit of a problem that the Mercosur deal, and interestingly, the members of European Parliament from Peter Magyar's party, Tisza, in Hungary, voted against this. One of the things about the economic deal with Mercosur, the free trade deal with Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, isn't it? Is that big farming countries are seeing it as an opportunity for South America to get cheap goods into and flood the European market. So you've had pushback from France, particularly, the massive strength of the farming community there. They're always on strike there, but also Poland and Hungary, I think, have not been happy. And actually, so I said yesterday, one of the big things that Europe is doing is quietly getting on with all these free trade deals around the world. But the problem for Europe that Europe has is it is a democratic organization of 27 member states who all have different economies and different ideas of what's a good thing. So Denmark might look at a Mercosur agreement and think that works really well for Denmark because our economy has a different mix. And France might look at the Mercosur deal and say, actually, that sucks for us because our French farmers are going to be undercut by I don't know, Argentinian beef or whatever. And so they've challenged the Mercosur agreement that has been agreed. And in fact, it was very close, but Peter Magyar was saying our Hungarian Tisza MEPs, and he's the one who we want to be in charge of Hungary, actually voted against this and have sent it to court. So Parliament demands sending the deal to the EU court, risking a longer delay and potentially the death of the agreement. It's a major defeat for Merz and other defenders of the agreement, and the EU's position amid the Trump tariffs, etc., not looking good. So this is actually a kick in the balls for mitigation against Trumpian tariffs. So I just thought I'd throw that one in there. Brian Allen says France now backs the European Parliament's push to suspend the EU-US trade deal. I think that is now, as mentioned earlier, it has now been suspended. This is a fallout of the Trump turning diplomacy into threats and tariffs. America isn't leading right now. It's isolating itself. And that's very interesting. Now we're going to go to Ukraine just very quickly. This is Steve Witkoff here speaking to a journalist.
We've seen, though, Russia continue their attacks, especially on critical infrastructure, most recently energy infrastructure, leaving thousands, maybe millions of Ukrainians without power, without heat. Do you think Putin is truly here for a peace deal?
Well, first of all, they're in a war. And so they're shooting at each other. And we don't condone that. I mean, we think it's unfortunate. That's why.
Oh, it's unfortunate. They're in a war. What do you think of the horrific strikes on Ukraine? Well, they're in a war. Oh, they're in a war. Oh, that's all right. We don't like it, but they're in a war. Okay, that's fine. So those strikes are okay then. So the fact that, you know, there's an energy crisis in Kiev right now, that's fine. Yeah, they're in a war. Thanks, Steve Woodcock. Have you ever been to Kiev? No. How many times have you been to Moscow? Oh, about a gazillion in the last couple of days. Oh, right. Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
The president and me at the president, with Jared at the president's direction, all working so hard for the peace.
We've seen, though.
Anyway, he's on his way back out to Moscow in the coming days, it appears. He met with Kirill Dmitriev yesterday. Yeah, as Kate from Kharkiv says, watch Witkoff being an absolute effing POS. We are at war, you effing orc, because Russia invaded Ukraine and attacking critical infrastructure is a war crime. And then you've got the adult in the room, Scott Bessent.
Let me just put this to you bluntly. Is Greenland or NATO more essential to the United States national security?
Well, Chris, that's obviously a false choice. That's a
not from the perspective of European leaders.
The European leaders will come around and they will understand that they need to be under the U.S. security umbrella. What would happen in Ukraine that if the U.S. pulled its support out? The whole thing would collapse.
What would happen in Ukraine if the US pulled its support out? The whole thing would collapse. You are not supporting Ukraine at the moment. You're not giving any assistance outside of some intelligence to Ukraine. Maybe some logistics assistance, maybe some planning and whatnot. But in terms of the lion's share of actual tangible material or financial assistance, you're doing zero. You've done nothing for a year now. So this is ridiculous. The idea that Ukraine would collapse if the US pulled out its support, it has pulled out its support and it hasn't collapsed.
If the U.S. pulled its support out, the whole thing would collapse. That the U.S., Kristen, to be clear, since 1980, the U.S. has spent U.S. military spending versus NATO military spending. We have spent $22 trillion more dollars than the Europeans have. That we are peace through strength. And the Europe.
Yeah, and that's because you've got bases all around the world and you've got the biggest armed forces, bigger than the next 12 countries combined. That's your choice. That's your economic choice, actually. And, you know, fair play to you. But that you're comparing apples to pears there, apples to bricks, really, because that's comparing your military spending to NATO spending. But your military spending isn't just NATO spending. And your military spending goes way beyond the purview of a European nation's spending, because Europe will primarily be looking at European security, whereas the US is involved all around the world because, you know, it likes to go into, I don't know, Kuwait and Iraq a couple of times, a couple of Gulf wars, help themselves to some oil there and so on and so forth. There's, you know, I just think it's thoroughly problematic. But the real point here is the US has not pledged any military or economic support to Ukraine since 2024. Now, Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, has been on fire recently. Here he says, and I'm just going to go through the bullet points of what he said. What has Russia achieved in the past 4 years? Taken 20% of Ukraine, it's had 1 million casualties and dead, decreased its sphere of influence. The Russian economy, 30% inflation, 16% inflation rate, 0% growth, no more reserves, incapacity to pay soldiers when the war ends. I'm more worried about Russia's unwillingness to end this war because they cannot afford to keep going than about Russia's capability to win this war. Let's keep things in perspective. This war has been a strategic failure of Putin. He increased the size of NATO. He made Ukraine European. He increased the defense budgets of European states. Are we able to defend ourselves? Yes, we are. Can we defend ourselves against Russia? Yes, we can in Europe. And he's absolutely bloody right. So, yeah, well done on Stubb for talking down Russia appropriately. Now, Finland, sticking on the country, is intended to criminalize the dissemination of false information on behalf of a foreign state. Yes, the goal is to make the systematic dissemination of fake information punishable when the perpetrator knowingly acts on behalf of a foreign intelligence service. Yes, people like Tenet Media and what's her name, Chen in the Canadian, who is it, Joanne Chen? Or no, it's not. Anyway, in America, and probably Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, because I think they probably did know about this. they would be, on these kind of rules, they would be had up for that. I think they should be in prison for being Russian assets myself. It's not about freedom of speech. It's about acting essentially treacherously as a traitor to your country. Germany and Britain are the main targets of possible Russian nuclear strikes on Europe, and this would be my choice, says Putin's spokesman Sergei Karaganov. Right, Karaganov. Now, why is this not front page news? Like, this happened, admittedly, on the 16th, so that I've waited 5 days to tell you this. I had so much stuff stacked up. But, like, Putin's spokesman is threatening Germany and Britain with nuclear strikes. Like, we need to be telling our populations that, not to scare them, just so they understand why we are supporting Ukraine, and so they understand that Russia are the bad guys here. Quote, Germany should be first because this country is a source of the worst in European history. Just jog on, guys. EU membership light plan for Ukraine spooks European capitals. So Brussels is drafting proposals to tear up the EU accession system used since the Cold War, replacing it with the contentious two-tier model. Could fast-track Ukraine's entry in any peace deal to end Russia's invasion. The preliminary plan under discussion would enable Ukraine to join the bloc, but with far less decision-making power. Normal voting rights, for instance, would not initially be available to Ukraine in leaders' summits and ministerial meetings. Under the proposal still being developed, Kyiv would gain incremental access to parts of the bloc's single market, its agricultural subsidies, and its internal development funding after meeting post-membership milestones. I think that sounds pretty sensible to me, by the way. Interesting observation here. A load of work being done by the Midas project. This is very extensive, this thread. I'm not going to go fully into it. But Jared Holt says this is absolutely insane, and as more reporting comes out between this and the Wall Street Journal's reporting and more, I think media needs to ask itself some hard questions about how legitimate any of this online MAGA stuff is on a given day. So what are we talking about? So this very extensive thread with lots of evidence says something strange happened in conservative Twitter on Thursday. A dozen right-wing influencers suddenly became passionate about semiconductor export policy, posting nearly identical and often false attacks over a 27-hour period on a bill, a US bill that most people have never heard of. What's going on here? And you can see Ryan Fournier is someone that I've referenced before. A couple of Brad Pascali, a couple of other sources here have exactly the same phraseology in their really weirdly niche Twitter comments on particular things here. So the AI Overwatch Act is a Republican bill that would let Congress review AI chip exports to adversaries like China. It's backed by Microsoft and right-leaning think tanks, but starting on January the 15th, influencers called it pro-China sabotage and a Democrat plot, all in unison. And as I said, I'm not going to go into all of this because it's a really long thread. The posts weren't just similar in opinion. They shared the same phrases, the same metaphors, the same false claims. 8 accounts use win-lose the AI race. 7 use strip Trump of power. 5 use hands control to Congress. 3 named Hakeem Jeffries specifically. 2 posts even contain the same typo, writing AL instead of AI. It's a hard mistake to make when writing, but it's an easy mistake to miss when copy pasting from a shared document. 2 more used the exact phrase Democrats and their deep state partners, so on and so forth. So you've got all of these different channels parroting this information because it is a systematic propaganda approach to communication. These influencers are being paid to say the same thing. Now, this it doesn't really matter what the issue is here. This is to do with an AI bill, so on and so forth. But you have to really worry that social media is being manipulated. People on social media aren't often the people you think they are, or they are the people you think they are, and they are just absolute, part of the political megaphone environment. People are just paid to say the same things, and it is pretty worrying. Good news in the UK. That petition that I was talking about previously, a petition to get a debate in Parliament over Russian influence in UK politics, got over 100,000 signatories. signatures, and that means it's going to be debated in Parliament. That's really, really good. Parliament is going to debate the petition calling for a public inquiry into Russian influence on UK politics and democracy on the 9th of February. This is why it's so important. And then, there's a video here talking about why it's important. I'm not going to go into that, but that's just really good news that the UK is hopefully going to take Russian influence in our politics seriously. And then we've got Iran. Just very quickly on Iran. What's your response to Iran's leadership and their regime continuing to taunt and threaten you? Is a question asked to Trump. Trump said, anything ever happens, we're going to blow. The whole country is going to get blown up. I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth. Wow. Okay. Interesting. So it looks like Trump is gearing up for some strikes on Iran. An activist, Ilya Hashemi, reports that some Iranians briefly regained internet access early Saturday, this is a few days back now, allowing them to upload footage from Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. The videos, filmed around January 8th to 9th, so this is a long time ago, show fires and clashes, including the state television building in Isfahan burning, it appears. So there's probably more destruction in Iran than we know about, because they've so solidly shut down the internet so that people can't get their information out. But I think it's been brutally oppressed, the protests now. Sunday Times has obtained a new report from doctors on the ground which says that at least 16,500 protesters have died and 330,000 have been injured in Iran. Just really horrific stuff going on in Iran. White House declined to comment on reports that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu asked President Trump to hold off on potential strikes against Iran. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed they spoke but refused to share details without Trump's approval. So there's that. What else do we have? Just a couple more bits. The US prefers to resolve tensions with Iran amid protests through diplomacy, said Steve Witkoff the other day. Diplomatic agreement should cover 4 issues: cease uranium enrichment, reduce missile stockpiles, reduce 2,000 kilograms of enriched nuclear material, end support for regional proxies. If they want to return to the League of Nations, then we can resolve these 4 issues diplomatically. This could be an excellent solution. The alternative is bad. When asked if he had a message to the people of Iran, he replied, these are incredibly courageous people. We stand with you. So I guess look out for strikes going forward. And just going back to sort of the Russia thing, I love that the Speaker of the Armenian Parliament the other day called Solovyov and Dugin, so the propagandist on state TV in Russia, and Dugin, Alexander Dugin, the nationalist, ultra-nationalist philosopher, who is the guy that underwrites Putin's policies with his thinking. The Speaker of the Armenian Parliament called them shit on a stick for calling for war against Armenia. I just love that. Like, yeah, tell it how it is. Say it back to those guys. Okay. And I was going to play you what Caroline Leavitt said about CBS News threatening to sue their ass off if they didn't show the entire segment or something. The idea that CBS now really is a complete plaything of the Trump administration. Right, that's enough from me. I now need to go through some very many comments from you guys. Darren Merritt, I wrote to both my senators this morning about Trump, ICE, and Ukraine. The representatives will get a letter this afternoon. That's brilliant. Thank you, Darren. Kevin Force, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. You're a legend. Always are. Pirates saying beer time. It probably is at your place. I do hope JP emphasizes Carney's speech at Davos, says Lada Gaga. It should give the free world hope and send shivers through America's spine. Lots more than I did show in that small excerpt, it has to be said. The pirate, thanks. Love lives, I thought, with ATP. Does it? Oh, that's nice. I love lives with ATP. Hit the like, please subscribe. It's free. Absolutely. Thanks, pirate. Zolan Quabble says he thinks he needs ownership of Greenland because he has no faith in any agreement, because he assumes other people have as little integrity as he does. Yep, agree with that. Just a few more of these comments. I'd rather hear JP rant than 1 minute of Trump. Thank you for that. If the UK says Jane Pearce, and that was Captain T, obvious. Jane Pearce, wrong spelling of Pearce, but nonetheless, good on you. If the UK and Europe don't see the insanity of Trump now, there is no hope for us. This is it. It's like now or never, it feels, doesn't it? Alcaz 1977 says, I don't know if that's Alsace. Global leaders shouldn't be negotiating with a white supremacist dictator Trump in the USA. We need the EU to push back hard. I don't necessarily disagree. Thank you very much, though. Golden Retriever Zumi says DW was analysing that the Davos speech sounded like, if we don't get Greenland, Europe is going to be alone on Ukraine. Some part of me just thinks, yeah, just let us be alone with you. Just let us be alone in general. Just stop hassling us and attacking us, and just let's get a sensible leader back in charge of the US, please. Cheryl, Norse explorers from Iceland were the first Europeans to discover Greenland. Norway and Denmark were unified at one point, and when they separated, Denmark got Greenland. There you go, history lesson for you all. Kevin Force, great article in The Atlantic by Anne Applebaum. The gravity of Trump's latest threat, coupled with his bizarre ramblings over a perceived award snub, should be the last straw. Agreed. Robert Martin, that Penguin Island is going to get nuked with Trump thinking it's some indigenous populated island that just gained independence. Is this new satellite imagery that shows a new king emperor colony somewhere in the world? I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Penguin Island got more tariffs than Mordor. Yep, Russia wasn't tariffed, was it? What a great live. Trump can make JP go ranting. Thanks to Pirate again. Mark Bisque, good to have you on board. The question is whether or not Trump is honorable has been answered. Now the question of honor goes to those who work under him. There will be repercussions for their disloyalty to the American people. Yeah, we do wonder what will happen after Trump's regime finishes, whether there will be repercussions for those people like Stephen Miller, who might be impeached or might get in trouble. Like the latest list of pardons reads as a fraud list. He's just released the latest list of pardons. It's fraud. And he's going on about Somalis in Minnesota committing widespread fraud, and he's pardoning everyone for fraud. It's unconscionable. Honestly, there's so much you could say about what Trump is doing these days. It just is, it's never ending. Thanks, Mark, very much. Pirate beer, need more beer. It's only Wednesday, for goodness sake. I can't help you with that. Thanks for Foodora. I don't know what that's reference to, but thank you for your super chats there, Pirate. Julian Rossiter. Slightly off topic, but Ro Khanna, who's a progressive Democrat who sponsored a bill with Thomas Massie, who's a very right-wing Republican, on the Epstein files. Anyway, Ro Khanna went on the Sean Ryan show. Interesting. So Sean Ryan is this right-adjacent military guy that you have all these... like Joe Rogan is not a Republican, right? But he's Republican adjacent. Actually voted previously for Bernie Sanders, not the last election, the one before. Then he got in bed with Trump and Trumpism. He's now rejecting it slightly. But these podcasts are very important for informing people, and they are Republican adjacent is the term you often hear. Sean Ryan is one of them. If you look at all the most popular shows, they're generally right-wing shows. And this is why the Democrats said after the last election, we need to have presence in the messaging sphere. We don't have these the infrastructure that the Republicans have. They've invested over the long term in owning entire networks like the Sinclair network for local television, like talk radio networks all across the United States, like Fox News, but also in the podcast world. And the Democrats are just playing catch up. They're 10 years behind plus. Slightly off topic, but Ro Khanna went on the Sean Ryan show. Not my usual podcast, but it's worth a watch. Ryan furious about being lied to regarding the release of the files. The Epstein files should make people furious because the present administration has actually broken the law. They are late with getting the files released, and they're trying to find a legal way of getting around that, but they have broken the law as it stands. The present Trump administration is illegal on the Epstein files. Stephen Bendal, thanks for the super chat. Who can deny that Trump is demented after this speech? The evidence is right in front of us. I don't disagree with that either, Stephen. Thank you for your support. Can you imagine a world where Trump gets Greenland and uses his personal ice forces to crush resistance in America, occupation in the guise of American border security? I'm scared of where we're headed. Yeah. Johnny Nebregard, thanks for your Norwegian love, my friend. Really appreciate it. People have been wondering about whether, welcome to World Bully, whether people will be able to boycott the World Cup. There's a German politician called, is it Justin Hart? Anyway, Hardt, who has suggested that Germany boycott the World Cup. So you might see, depending on what goes on with Greenland and with ICE and with the fact that 75 nations have had their visas stop being processed, you might see more and more pushback to the World Cup in the United States. Christine Coughlin says, all democracies should sell off all the US Treasury bonds. And that's what we talked about earlier. Finnish guy, we need to kick all US troops out of Europe and dump all bonds. This is another answer that Europe could have, which is removing the US military bases from Europe. Problem is that there is this, we need the US to help us normally, but it's just when you have this change of leader that is, switcherooed the entire American outlook, America could get punished on account of this one guy. Well, it's not just one guy, it's his people around him, and it's a Republican establishment that has not pushed back one iota to Trump. thetruesize.com. Right, let's do that. Thank you, my friend. thetruesize.com. The true, helps if I can spell, truesize.com map. There we go. Right, Benny, you're a ledge, absolute legend. Okay, so this is the true size. Share this instead. We are going to look at, so that's what the United States looks like if you put it close to the equator. So United States starts getting smaller, it gets bigger as it's up there, it gets smaller as you bring it down. Greenland up here, so we want Greenland. So Greenland, there we go. So that looks massive, doesn't it, Greenland? But you start pulling Greenland down to the equator and Greenland is suddenly a lot smaller, right? This is why, the landmass of Greenland is smaller than the landmass of Algeria by all accounts. Let's actually, I need to fact check that. So we have area Greenland versus Algeria. And let's look at this. So Algeria, 2.38 million. Greenland, 2.16. Algeria is bigger than Greenland. That is true. Okay, so just like, honestly, Trump looks at a 2D map with a Mercator projection, and he says, bloody hell, Greenland's massive. We need that because Denmark can't protect that. It's too big. And you're like, okay. I mean, is it still that big? Let's have a look at Russia. Russia's got 11 time zones or whatever it is. Okay, it is a big country, and it's still a big country, but it's not quite as big as you previously would have thought, right? Perspective, really bloody important. India, on the equator, it's going to be marginally smaller. Super, super important that we understand that. So thank you for that, Benny. Right, let's get back to what you guys were saying. Sorry, this is going on a little bit too long, probably. Fun for the little whiskey shop. I do need to put another order in. Thank you. I've run out of white port. So thank you for the pirate. You are super, super generous, always. Krasnov, US dollar goes down. One is forced into selling to prevent loss. It might be exactly the goal, dismantling the US dollar, NATO, EU, Putin, and Xi will love it. I mean, yeah, the problem is that attacks by the Europe, I guess your point, the attacks by Europe against the United States will weaken the United States, which then makes it weaker against competitors like China and Russia. So none of this is good. None of this is good for the Western world. It's just really, really frustrating. Jonathan, I like your show. I like your reports, but the large arguments at some point you have to realize it makes no difference. It doesn't matter. Do you think you could have talked Hitler from war? Yeah, okay, but the point is, no, but I'm not trying to convince Hitler. Like, I'm literally not going to be arguing with Trump. But hopefully I will give ammunition for people to go and argue with their spouses or their loved ones or their friends or their neighbors or the people at the water cooler. The idea is that, for example, a little thing here is just showing you the size of Greenland on a map when you compare it next to another nation on the equator. Now, not everyone knows that, right? And by showing you that, you go, oh my goodness, and then you go back and tell that to someone else. So I'm not disabusing Trump personally of his erroneous positions, but I'm reporting things and I am arguing against those their claims because that's how we educate each other. We live in a world where I'm telling you stuff so that I'm influencing you. I'm an influencer, right? I'm trying to influence you, hopefully, towards a more accurate understanding of the world. I think just that Mercator projection thing is kind of like a metaphor for that. So yeah, but thank you, Jeff, by the way, for the comment. Travantal says, I feel like Denmark being split into choosing where it will focus. We are one of the countries giving most help to Ukraine per capita. Now we also need to deal with the US. Yes. This is a really important point, and thank you for this, which is it's a massive distraction away from Ukraine. And Zelensky's publicly come out and said this. He says this is distracting. The focus needs to be on our war at the moment because, you know, obviously from our point of view, our future depends on it. And yet the focus is on Greenland. Everything that Trump does is of benefit to Russia at the moment. Venezuela wasn't in terms of it being a friend of Russia, but the distraction is, and Greenland is, and that undermines NATO. It focuses our attention elsewhere, and actually Ukraine has been hammered by Russian drones and missiles recently. Simon Paul says, hopefully everyone will boycott the World Cup and the Olympics. I'm seriously thinking of not watching the World Cup football or the Olympics, but I don't know whether my viewership will change anything. But I suppose if I shout about it, maybe it has an effect. Gamig Bonnie here says travel bans to Europe for unvaccinated Americans. Interesting. There's talk about visa restrictions as well that could affect Americans. The problem is all of these things negatively affect the European economy, right? So yeah, and you don't want to punish Americans in a sense who want to come to Europe and experience Europe. So you've got to be very careful with how you deal with Trump. Estonia plans a €1+ billion investment in ballistic missile defense. Ooh, I haven't seen that. Michael Gowdy, thank you for that. Shulmi here says, EU is ready on a powerful new agenda with India. Today, the EU agreed to move forward with the signature of a new security and defense partnership, expand our cooperation in cyber defense. Kaya Kallas. Yep, looking to these BRICS nations, interestingly. So that could help undo BRICS. France already sells Rafale fighter jets to India. India have just put in another massive order for Rafale, so that's significant. Please Feed Me Poop says, does the US have equivalent amounts of foreign debt that they can sell off in response? A great question. If anyone else can answer that, that's a really, really good question. Putin puppet, the US bases in Europe and elsewhere could be the enemy from within, as the US troops will blindly follow orders. Krasnov is into 1929 crisis. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, though. Michael Lamming, we should start sending off the Treasury debt before it becomes worthless. That's a good point. UK had an offshore wind auction resulting in prices 40% below gas. There's a lot of disinformation about that. You'll see even Andrew Neil, I keep quoting from Andrew Neil. Andrew Neil keeps slagging off that wind auction, and he doesn't understand the figures, and he doesn't understand people are comparing new wind to old gas. We should be comparing new wind to new gas production. And anyway, just be careful what you read online. But yes, I think that was a real success, and I think Ed Miliband did a good job. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't know. Joe H.S. Burner, maybe. Jonathan, you should rush to Davos and get a word into the Orange Clown. Yeah, but we just had this conversation that I'm not going to be disabusing him of his, but I would love to sit down and have a chat with Donald Trump and not allow him to stand up and run away, actually to bottom out all of his thoughts and show where he's deeply ignorant on certain things. But no one does that to him because he doesn't allow it. Putin puppet, the best is to sell or hit the tech bro stocks. Which ones just keep the US out of recession? Yeah, so the S&P 500 is doing so well primarily because 45% of it is in the big tech or whatever, by pumping money around in each other's only bubble. Yeah, we talked about this before. Money goes from here to here to here to here to here and then back to there. So there's a big circle of tech funding that goes on, which is interesting. Zeb Carter gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Legend, mate. Thank you, Zeb. Putin puppet again, seeing China's dependence on energy and food imports, it can't afford the US type loudmouth aggression. I mean, China's major concerns are energy and food. You know, from a 1 billion people point of view, they need to make sure that they've got food for 1 billion people and energy for 1 billion people. And that kind of defines a lot of what they do. USA and Russia started 83% of armed conflicts after World War II. There you go. Interesting stat there. We're getting towards the end here. Michael Vujar, thanks for that, matey. Really appreciate the 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Lovely guy. Thank you. Mukbenji Boo says, it's like saying to your neighbor, I spent £200,000 more on my Ferrari than you did on your car, so I'm paying for your car. That's what Trump's theorizing with the paying for NATO is ridiculous. Also, Trump is so effing boring, but says Boogie Woogie, and I agree with that. Martin Matt says, look, break down the US commitment to real North Atlantic defense and find out their spending for NATO itself is way lower than most NATO members' efforts currently. Yes, we talked about this the other day. Actually, their expenditure for European defense is something like 33 billion, and Europeans pay way more than that in their collective defense. So yeah, absolutely. Tom Marnie's watched the whole thing today, Trump's speech. So you get an award for that. You get the Nobel, I don't know, Nobel Shite Prize, where you have to listen to that for. Anyway, Nordbaum, thank you for some Swedish love there and the super sticker. Really appreciate that. So that was a very long tail off to the video. Thank you for all the super chats. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you. There's also buy me a coffee and PayPal in the links below. Not that I'm asking for that, but just out of interest there. Sorry that these are so long at the moment. So much is going on, but hopefully that gives you a real good sense of what's going on. Also a chance to interact and chat and have your live experience, which is fantastic. I really do appreciate you, and I love the fact that you look forward to these lives, that there's a time for us to hang out together, and that you guys actually give a damn what I say, and it has some kind of merit and utility. And for that, thank you for being there. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Big love to all the super chatters and to all the live chatters and to the mods. And yeah, just remember that thing about dissenting opinions. Let's make sure that we can cope with dissenting opinions in reasonable manners, as we won't all agree on everything. Take care. Big love. Toodle pips. Whew. My brain hurts.